Alrighty, so I did a lot of yammering in the last lecture about statements and whether or not they're true or they're false. And when we describe statements that way, what we're talking about are truth values. True and false are truth values, and every statement has a truth value. Every statement is either true or false, and there's no statement that's true and false at the same time, and there's no statement that's neither true nor false at any given moment. Of course, we might look at a statement and not be able to determine whether or not the statement is true or false because we don't have enough information to know. And in that case, we just say, well, the truth value is undetermined. I don't know whether it's true or false. I know it's one of them, not both of them and not neither of them, but I can't determine which of them it is, so it's undetermined. So you take a statement like this. You're at CR right now. And by you, I mean you. You who are watching this lecture right now. For me, that statement has an undetermined truth value. I don't know where you are. But you do, so you can accurately determine the truth value of this statement. If you're sitting in the CR library watching this, or you are sitting in the dorms, this statement right now is true. But if you're at home sitting at your kitchen table or at work watching this, the statement for you, the statement is false, okay? Now, the statement might have a different truth value at a different moment in time. So if it's true right now because you're at CR, but you rewatch this lecture tomorrow from a different location other than CR, the statement would then be false. Okay, so a statement can be true at one moment and false at another and vice versa, but it can't be both true and false at the same time. And it can't be neither true nor false. Now you take a statement like this, aliens exist, that statement also is either true or false, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to determine what the truth value is. And we're going to have to begin by really carefully defining the terms. When we say aliens, what do we mean? Is this a political statement that related to like the Alien and Sedition Act that has to do with the legal status of someone in a particular country? Or are we talking here about creatures that exist but have as their planet of origin some planet other than Earth? And once we carefully define the terms of the statement, we can go and look and assess the evidence. Does this statement seem to correspond to or reflect reality? If it does, it's true. If we don't think it does, then we would say it's false. Now consider a statement like this: God exists. Is that statement true or false? And you may be thinking to yourself, well, it's true for some people and false for others. And I understand where you're coming from when you say that, but I'm going to suggest that's not a correct way of thinking about this. I'm going to suggest that this statement either accurately corresponds to the way that reality is, or it doesn't. And of course, the first thing we have to do is carefully define our terms. Well, what exactly are you referring to with this term God? What do you mean by that? What do you mean exists? And so let's say that somebody says, well, what I mean by God is this source of creation that is depicted in the scripture, the holy texts of the three major monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. That's what I mean by God. And by exist, I mean that this is an actual feature of reality. Well, if that's what the terms mean, then this statement can't be true for one person and false for another. Somebody's got it wrong, because this statement is either corresponding to and reflecting reality, or it isn't. And if I believe the statement is true and this being that I've defined doesn't actually exist, me believing the statement is true doesn't make the being exist. And conversely, if this being does exist in reality and I choose to reject this statement and say it's false, that doesn't make that being go away. Right? Reality is what it is. And the statements that we make either correspond to that reality or they don't. And if they don't, they're false statements. And if they do, they're true statements. And so what we're touching at here is a particular theory of truth that we're going to operate from in this course. So there's competing theories of truth, and you're familiar with some of them. What I've been suggesting to you here in this lecture is this idea that statements are true if they correspond, or when they correspond, to the way that reality is actually organized at the moment the statement's being considered. And this is called the correspondence theory of truth. Now, this is different than the theories of truth that you might have heard of, where people talk about my truth. I'm living my truth. And there's some sense in which my truth is a meaningful concept, right? My truth is that vanilla ice cream tastes better than chocolate ice cream. And that may not be your truth. But think about what those statements are asserting. They're not asserting something that exists independent of you or me as a feature of reality. They're asserting something about my interior experience of a flavor of ice cream. And you don't have access to that. And so when I say to you, vanilla ice cream tastes better than chocolate, or you say, no, that's false, chocolate ice cream tastes better than vanilla, we can kind of both be making truthful statements. We can make true statements even though they seem to be contradictory statements, right? I make one statement that I say is true, you say that statement is false, and then somehow we're both right about the same statement. That doesn't seem to align very well with what I just got done telling you about every statement not being able to be true and false at the same time. But if you consider what that statement is actually asserting, it's asserting something about an experience, my individual experience of the flavor of ice cream, and your individual experience of the flavor of ice cream. So we're actually not asserting something about one feature of reality. We're asserting something about two features of reality. And that's how we can have a statement be both true and false for two different people. All right? Same thing with a statement like this. Abortion is immoral. Got to carefully define those terms. Okay? Now, you may be thinking here, well, that's just an opinion. That's just a belief. And you're right, it is. But we assert beliefs with statements, and statements are either true or false. But as I said, we're going to have to carefully define our terms. What exactly do you mean when you mention this word abortion? What are you referring to? And what are the criteria for judging actions as being morally permissible or impermissible? What determines when an action is moral and immoral, and why is that the appropriate criteria for categorizing those actions? And if we can come to agreement on the criteria for judging actions as moral or immoral, and we can come to agreement about what exactly we're referring to with the word abortion, then we can come to an agreement about whether or not this statement is true or false. And we may not be able to come to that agreement, in which case we'd say, well, this is a contested term. This is a term that we can't definitively determine a truth value for. It's either true or false, but we're still sort of working this out and trying to figure this out. Same thing with a statement like this. Implementing stricter gun control laws will reduce the number of school shootings. We're going to have to carefully define our terms to determine whether or not this statement is true or false. What kind of gun control laws are we talking about here? What are those laws specifically? And what would constitute a reduction in the number of school shootings? And what exactly is a school shooting? What are we talking about here? And again, if we can carefully define our terms, we can determine that this statement is either true or it's false. But it's going to rest largely on the definitions of terms. And that's the legwork of philosophy, quite frankly, is carefully defining our terms so that we know what exactly it is that we're talking about, so that we can assess whether or not a claim that's being made, a statement that's being offered about something that some condition of reality is true or false. Does it correspond to the way that things are or not? Justin Bieber's music is art. Are you thinking to yourself, well, yeah, but you'd have to really carefully define what art is before we can determine whether that statement is true or false. And if you thought that, bravo for you. That's exactly what we'd have to do. Of course, whether or not people like something is going to differ from person to person. But there are going to be very few people that define, at least in a serious way, there are going to be very few people that define art as simply that which a person likes. Right? Because then suddenly everything would become art, because someone likes virtually everything is liked by someone. So if art is simply that which a person likes, then suddenly everything becomes art. And if everything's art, there's nothing to distinguish art from non-art, and then art becomes a meaningless concept. So we'd have to think really carefully about how we would define art, come to an agreement on that definition, and then figure out whether or not this statement about Justin Bieber's music is true or false. Does his music fit into this category of art that we've defined? All right? So truth values.